Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Mark Wordsworth, Chair of the Bicentenary Steering Group of the RNLI, and we're going to talk about a charity that this year is 200 years old. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Tony.
And good to see you in an appropriate place, i.e. the Alderney Lifeboat Station.
Yes, well, I'm sure we may come to it later on, but having been ex-crew, it's always nice to come back and base yourself here.
Yeah, we're going to come on to that. Now, it's
the
got to be...
lifeboat is out, actually. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, so...
Really? Yeah. Mark,
yeah,
it's got to
15 people.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the oldest UK charities, I guess, hasn't it?
Yes, the RNLI was founded on the 4th of March, 1824. Basically, and it was the vision of a man called Sir William Hillary, who had lived quite an exciting life and ended up in the Isle of Man. And he kept watching ships sink. And eventually it got to the point that he decided he was going to do something about it, because they were sinking within sight of shore. So people would stand on the shore, watch people die. And so it all came to a head in December 1822, with the sinking of the brig, Her Majesty's brig, Racehorse. And so that was it for him. He decided, now I'm going to act. So he wrote a pamphlet in 1823 to the King and the Navy, thinking that the Navy would go for this to set it up. Because at that time, which is almost unbelievable, there were 1,800 shipwrecks a year around the coast of the British Isles. Quite a few of them were Navy ships.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Navy decided they didn't want to do it for whatever reason. So he decided to organize it himself, and he was quite well connected. He used to have a little army of 1,000 people that fought in Europe for the British government. So he had all sorts of connections, etc. And so he got a group together, and it was founded in a pub in Bishopsgate in London. And the King George IV, agreed immediately to become its royal patron. And since then, the RNLI has always had the reigning monarch, an unbroken line of reigning monarch, as patrons. And the then Prime Minister, Robert Jenkinson, became its first president, and the Archbishop of Canterbury chaired the meeting. So it had a good start in terms of its recognition and its backers. And just one small correction, it's 200 years old next year, not this year.
Beg your pardon. 199 years old, then. Exactly. We're settled for that. And this guy, Sir William Hillary, pretty brave man, because of course in those days lifeboats were rowed. There's no motors or anything like that. And he was still actually involved in rescues at age 60.
Yes, he won. I can't remember if he won 2 or 3 medals, basically. But he certainly won 2. And so he wasn't just a pen pusher who had a good idea and wrote a pamphlet. You know, he was out there doing it himself as well.
Practical man.
You know, a very practical man. And the risks then were massively high because many people couldn't swim. The crews were made up of fishermen, and for all sorts of interesting beliefs some of them had at the time, that if you learned to swim, it meant your boat would sink.
Yeah,
they didn't learn to swim, and there were no life jackets then because they hadn't been invented. So if you went in, pretty much you were gone.
Mark, presumably in those days, the method of alerting the lifeboat men that there was a shout would have been what, a maroon or something like that?
It would be almost by word of mouth, because if you go to some of the tiny villages, like Mousehole, where the Penlee lifeboat disaster happened, you know, that village is so small, you can run around the streets and just get people together. Also, a lot of them worked in the harbours, you know, etc. Failing that, it was maroons or sirens, and now it's you know, electronic pagers that to alert people that they need to turn up.
Now, it's quite interesting because when we've been sort of toing and froing with one another on all this, I'm reading a book called Attention All Shipping by Charlie Connolly. And I got to a bit where he's going around the UK in terms of the shipping areas. And I got to a bit that covered Cromer. And suddenly I see Henry Blogg was the most honoured lifeboatman ever. And that's incredible, isn't it?
Yes, well, he did 53 years on the boat, Cromer, most of those as coxswain. So in 53 years of service, you've got quite a good opportunity to do a lot of good work and brave work.
Yeah, it's
3 gold medals and 4 silver medals. And you know, and also an RNLI gold medal is ranked as the same as a Victoria Cross or a George Cross. It carries that level of recognition. So in the same way as, you know, it's almost unheard of to get a VC or a George Cross, because you have to do something absolutely incredibly brave. Same for getting an RNLI gold medal. Very few people get one. You know, to get 3 is astonishing.
Yeah, very much so. Let's skip on now into the 20th century and World War II. The RNLI was in service in both the wars, actually, and helped with the Dunkirk evacuation, I believe.
Yes, I mean, they did both world wars, and at Dunkirk, many lifeboats went, but many of them were crewed by Navy people because they'd been commandeered by the Navy for the Dunkirk rescue. But 2 lifeboats had volunteer lifeboat crews on Dunkirk. And it's interesting, in the wars, it had an impact on the lifeboat service, because in the First World War, a lot of the many young men went to the fronts, and therefore the crews got older. But also, interestingly, women were more heavily involved, because they played a much bigger role, particularly on launches and recoveries, basically. And that's where I personally first got the impression of the RNLI as a humanitarian organization rather than just a search and rescue organization. That's something I might come back to later. Is that we're in the business of saving lives at sea. We don't judge, you know, why you're coming to our shores, whether you should be allowed to come to our shores, you know, etc. Or whether you're a foe in time of war. I mean, I have a postcard of the Dover lifeboat in 1940, bringing in a pilot from Messerschmitt 109 that had been shot down in the Channel. So, you know, well, not that same Dover lifeboat, but the Dover lifeboat will be out today dealing with the small boat crossings, because I'm looking out of the window over Bray Harbour, and it's absolutely dead flat calm with no wind. So unfortunately, this will be a day when many more migrants will try and cross the Channel.
Yeah.
Mark, and so lots of lives were saved.
Yeah. It's an incredible organisation from that point of view. What made the RNLI select Poole as the headquarters? Were there any special reasons for that?
You know, that is a question I don't know the answer to, because I've never asked it. As long as I've been involved, it's always been at Poole. How long it's been at Poole, I don't know, basically.
Okay, well, I guess it's one of the largest natural harbours in the world, isn't it? It's a big old area.
And it's got this. The training used to be done in various centres, but now we have one big training centre at Poole called the RNLI College. And also on the site, again, lifeboats used to be built by third-party lifeboat builders or boat builders, and now they're built by the RNLI themselves. So they have a large boat manufacturing facility on site as Poole as well. So they have 3 things at Poole. They have the teams that run the charity and run the operations. They have all the training centres, the wave pool, etc., and they have boat building there. So it's a big site.
Yeah, with the boat building, Mark, do they are they able to sort of export stuff? You know, do they sell stuff to other countries or anything like that? Or
no, they just build for us. And the RNLI's got a long, deep history of being right at the forefront of lots of developments in search and rescue, maritime search and rescue, and also the vessels that you need to do it, and other things like the development of life jackets, the development of inflatable boats, then rigid inflatable boats. And so it's partly an innovation centre, but the RNLI is very good at sharing its knowledge with the rest of the world. And that's one of the things we've been doing on the international programme, is sharing our knowledge, or intellectual property, IP, as some people call it, because with the internet, you know, we can share that with other organizations, and particularly countries that don't currently have a a maritime search and rescue service, and many countries are now signed. Well, every country in the United Nations signed up to the United Nations Convention on Drowning, which was passed a couple of years ago, to actually make it a part of their business to have proper facilities to protect their citizens in and around the coast and the rivers and things like that. And the RNLI was very proud because it was proposed by the Irish and the Bangladesh governments, and the RNLI was referenced on the floor of the United Nations for its work. So, that's excellent.
Can't do better than that. In terms of the organisation, how many salaried staff do you know roughly?
Well, the total is, when I say moves around a bit,
yeah,
there are 35,000 people in the organisation. Around about 30,000 of those are volunteers, and that spans volunteers from. Sorry, that's the coxswain just coming.
Yeah, I see he's there. Good morning, Declan.
Yeah, he's in.
Coxswain's in, now the coxswain's out again.
Right. So of the others, you've got the people in Poole, you've got people in boat building, most stations with an all-weather lifeboat, and we'll come on to numbers of, I'm sure, boats and stations at some point.
Yeah.
They would have a full-time paid mechanic to keep an all-weather lifeboat maintained day in, day out, etc. So the mix of people that count as and sometimes people are not full-time employees.
Yeah.
Spans everything from management, boat building, trainers, running the college, mechanics on stations and things like that. But that number is somewhere around 5,000.
Yeah, that's an incredible number of people to be involved in an organisation like that. What about the people that are involved with the beaches? That you get a bit of support from the local authorities on that, do you?
Yes, so beach lifeguards started 20 years ago. Now we cover about 250 beaches per summer, basically. Those beach lifeguards are paid staff.
Yeah,
because they're not on call. They can't be doing any other work. They're on the beach all day. So they are paid, and in some circumstances, some local councils share some of the costs of having them, because there may be some beaches where we normally wouldn't put lifeguards on, or as many as they want, and the council would come to us and say, if we pick up the tab, will you cover this beach for us? And so that's a sort of service that it doesn't recover all of the cost. We don't make a profit out of it.
No.
But yes, so beach lifeguards start for the season, and many of them come back year after year, and then they go and do, I don't know, some of them I know, they'll do the winter ski season in the Alps or something. Then they'll do the summer on beach lifeguarding, and that's how they live their lives.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Training schemes to save lives, are they available to the public in general, or how does that work?
Well, one aspect that the RNLI has been building up, it's the sort of prevention versus cure argument, is, we have water safety teams, many of them, that visit schools and other institutions and start to teach people about water safety. What happens if you fall in the water? The float to live technique that's been developed. And so hopefully that, we've got a more organized approach now to teaching young people long before they get to the coast what to make them safer. Because if you break down what the RNLI does, a lot of people think it's daring, dangerous rescues somewhere in the middle of the night in the middle of the English Channel or similar. But actually, there's a very wide range of activities it undertakes to make sure that people are safe on the coast, they're safe when they get there. There's a lot of new activities that didn't exist even 10 years ago, like paddle boarding. And so we've seen an increase in having to go and rescue paddle boarders, because many of them, first of all, you don't have a sail like a windsurfer. So if you get offshore in a tide and with an offshore wind, you can't get back. And a lot of them don't understand about tides and wind. And so there's a training there that makes them safer. Fishermen, we do a lot of training around teaching fishermen who go and fish off the rocks but don't wear a life jacket because they don't think they're in the water. And shortly afterwards, they might be in the water. So it's not just, you know, the search and rescue aspect. There's a much wider education piece that hopefully society benefits from and helps save many more that we're not aware about, because the activity that they might have undertaken, they don't.
And of course,
at one point I thought, Tony, at one point I thought would be useful to make is what we call, the RNLI has a very specific definition of a life saved. And it's basically someone who would have undoubtedly died if it wasn't for the action of the lifeboat and the crew. So if the lifeboat goes out today and tows in a motor cruiser that's just run out of fuel, that doesn't count. That's just people assisted. So the total so far is 144,000 lives saved during the lifetime of the RNLI to date.
The sad thing, of course, is that there have been RNLI people that have drowned, been lost. How many does that account for? Any idea?
That's say 100, and someone might say, well, don't you know the exact number? There were some stations that are now part of the RNLI that existed before the RNLI was founded and then became part of the RNLI, and it's whether you count those unfortunate souls that lost their lives then or not. But it's around about coming up for 600 volunteers that have died in service. That isn't to count people who've suffered serious injuries and had to take them on for the rest of their life, or at the moment, you know, PTSD, dealing with a lot of I mean, that's the other part people don't see. You know, very sadly today, there's quite a lot of suicides and self-harming, and so crews who are just people have to go out and do things that might normally have ended up in an accident and emergency department, and still go home and see their wife and kids, or husband and kids. And, you know, those can have big impacts on people who don't do that for a day job.
Yeah, I can imagine. Mark, can we come on to the number of boats in the fleet? Because you've got two types, haven't you? Essentially, the all-weathers and the inflatables. Is that right?
Yes, by numbers, yes. So we have all-weather lifeboats, which now are self-righting lifeboats. They have a hatch, you seal it if you roll it, but that is not been done in service, only in water test tanks so far. You come back up again. And the inshore lifeboats, the Atlantics, basically, they're big ribs with 4 or 5 people crews. But we also have hovercrafts on things like Morecambe Bay, and where, you know, you've got giant sand estuaries and mud flats that you can't access it any other way. And we have surf boats, etc., that the beach lifeguards use in conditions that are too tough for them to swim out to. So there's 238 lifeboat stations around the UK, Ireland, and the Crown dependencies of the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands. And within those 230, some stations only have 1 boat, some stations have more than 1 boat. They'll have an inshore and an all-weather, depending on what the pattern of casualties historically is shown as needed in that location. Those 238 stations.
Right, okay. How much does an all-weather lifeboat cost, roughly?
Well, Shannon costs roughly £2 to £2.5 million. Because you've got to build the Shannon, but then it needs what's called a SLARS rig, which is what recovers it from the water or the beach, basically. So all in, it'll cost about £2.5 million.
What about lifespan?
The lifespan of the current fleet is 25 years, but then it can be refitted for another 25 years. So the Sevens, which is the largest lifeboat in the all-weather lifeboat in the fleet, they're 25 years old now, and they're going to be brought in and refurbished over a 7-year cycle, so they can do another 25 years.
So it's pretty good in terms of,
and that's
okay. Let's get on to fundraising.
Whereas the inshore lifeboats have got rubber tubes, so they get refurbished much more frequently than that because they degrade in UV and etc.
But it's good to know that assets last a long time, isn't it? You know, from that point
They
of
do,
view.
and actually, you know, partly it's the cost of the assets, but you know, when the trustees are making decisions on what asset goes where, you know, other factors come into consideration, which is the sustainability of the boat. Namely, can we crew it for the next 25 years? You know, because I won't mention where it is, but you know, there's one village somewhere that has only 217 people left in it, and it needs 3 full-time crew to launch the particular boat that's on. And so eventually you can't sustain you can't sustain that thing. Also, big changes in society are something that we need to look forward to for the next 200 years. You know, in the Southwest, we have issues because so many second homeowners have bought homes that no people who are on the lifeboat can afford to live within pager range. You've got to be within 10 minutes drive. In other parts of the country, because of the cost of living crisis, you know, people have had to take second and third jobs, so they're not available to think, or they're on 0 hours contracts, which means if you don't know which day of the week you're going to be called in, you can't really carry a pager very easily. So there's all sorts of changes in society that we have to look for, and that's one of the purposes. So the bicentenary next year has 3 purposes: to commemorate the past, to celebrate the present, and for me, just as importantly, if not more importantly, to inspire the future. Because, you know, without the 30,000 volunteers that we have, people in the branches, people who do fundraising on flag days, people who do that, without those people, the organization can raise as much money as it wants, but it will not exist as an organization, an independent organization in 200 years' time. And the way I sort of liken it is having worked in theatre for a long time, if you go to the theatre, you see about 6 or 7 people on stage. Basically, those are the people in yellow gear and yellow wellies. But behind that, there's lighting, there's wigs, there's costume makers, there's you know, there's ushers, there's ticket people, so without all those people that make a theatre work, basically those 7 people can't be on stage. And it's the same for the RNLI. I know everyone, well, we don't, but because they go to get offshore, like in ordinary, you need a boarding boat. So you need people who are there to drive the boarding boat. Lots of boats have got tractor launch operations, so you need tractor drivers lots of slipways, you need people to run the slipway to recover the vessel. So there's a very, very wide range of volunteers that support the relatively small number of people that actually go to sea. But without them, they can't go to sea.
Interesting, the theatrical analogy there, Mark, because, you know, as you say, if you look at a movie, for example, the number of people in the end credits who've been involved in it, huge numbers, but there we are. So let's just talk about the fundraising aspect of the RNLI. Legacies form a substantial contribution, I believe.
Yes, I mean, over a long cycle of, let's say, the last 20 years, around about, so the RNLI raises somewhere between 180 million and 200 million a year, basically, in order to do what it does. And of that, around 2/3 comes from legacies, and 1/3 comes from retail sales, street collections, donations, and other commercial licensing opportunities that generate the balance of the funds. So yes, you know, the organization is very dependent on those amazing people who, you know, give money in what it does, and is not often perhaps witnessed by a third party. But there are around about 8,500 lifeboat launches a year, basically. So that's a lot. And I have an app on my phone, which I'm going to do this at speed.
Okay.
So these are yesterday's launches: Dunlogare, Mablethorpe, Valentia, Islay, Oban, New Brighton, Redcar-Skerries, Keswick, Poole, Angle, Littlehampton, Wells, Sheerness, Tenby, Horton and Port Amouth, Yarmouth, Hunstanton, Staiths and Brunwick, Tenby, Queensferry, Seahouses, Howth, Chiswick, the Mumbles, Baltimore, Lowestoft, St Mary's, Blythe and Walmer.
All in a day. All in a day.
So that's in a day. So those are things that one day. And in other countries, of course, they have a coast guard, or they have or they have, very sadly, they have nothing. So and the RNLI has been funded for nearly public donations, and that started when it was first founded, but also the RNLI held the first ever charity street collection in Manchester in 1891, and that was because of the loss of life when the Mexico went down off Liverpool, and it's the greatest loss of life on a single day. 27 lifeboatmen died rescuing 4 German sailors off a German bar. They sent the first boat, they lost it. They sent another boat, they lost it. They sent the third boat. Some of those came back, and so what people forget, I forget sometimes. In that era, there's no social security. So if someone died, their family was left destitute. So there were 44 widows and kids, basically, and so they organised the first ever street collection, and then obviously that's been adopted by other charities as well. But and the RNLI is very proud that it doesn't take government funds, because it gives us independence. We're not told what to launch to by anybody else other than ourselves and the Coast Guard, and we don't have to get involved in politics.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, I think. Actually, I think if you had government involvement, then everything goes wrong. But that's a personal opinion.
No, and also, I mean, again, it's quite nice to do these chats, because one can, not bust some myths, but just perhaps to educate people. Lifeboats don't launch themselves. There are some people who I know, I won't name, in the national press, who think that the RNLI spend their afternoons driving around in the Channel just to see if there's anything to do. No lifeboat gets launched without a tasking authority, which is the Irish Coast Guard or the Maritime Coast Guard Agency here, and then it doesn't get launched unless the launch officer decides whether it's safe to go for the boat. Because the inshore lifeboats have got a limit of 4 meter waves in the dark. They can't go out above that. So if the Coast Guard tasks them, the launch officer will say, "I'm sorry, you can't go. That's too much. We'll send an all-weather lifeboat from longer away." So that's how things get going.
Yeah. You were involved for quite a while with the Alderney boat, weren't you?
Yeah, I was on the Alderney boat as crew and navigator for 11 years until 2017, and then I just couldn't do enough. I wasn't here enough to keep the training up. And so I stood down. And in 2018, I put myself forward and got elected onto the RNLI Council, which is about 50 people, from which the trustees are drawn. And then a couple of years after that, a trustee position came up, so I put my name forward for that. So basically, I probably on average now do about 2 days a week of volunteering for the RNLI, in my role as chair of the investment committee, on the finance committee, chairing the Bicentenary Steering Group, and on the council and the trustee board. Because I can't go to sea anymore. I'd love to be able to go to sea, but they're a better lifeboat than me, mainly most of them, frankly. So I think there are better people doing the role now than I ever did.
But what you're doing is essential, isn't it, really? I mean, if you don't have these bits within the organisation, you don't get anywhere.
Yes, and it's a joy to me to be able to, continue my association with the organisation by doing things that I can do and I can contribute. And it's just been, I think what we learned from the pandemic, if not from other things, is, all I would say to people is not just volunteer for the lifeboat, but just volunteer, because I think there's a huge benefit, not just to the society, but also to your own mental health and feeling of well-being if you're putting something back, whatever that something is, basically. And we see that perhaps more in Alderney than most places, because whether it's fire service, ambulance service, lifeboats, Meals on Wheels, there's a huge volunteering aspect to making Alderney work, basically, which perhaps you don't see in other communities elsewhere, or many other communities, because those are provided by regional or national governments.
Alderney, let's face it, Mark, Alderney would not work without volunteers, would it, really?
No, I think it's amazing. And then whether it's the Wildlife Trust, which I was involved in a while ago, I think you were involved in, so there's lots of opportunities. And so hopefully for your listeners, if you are living on the island, or even if you spend a substantial amount of time here as a second homeowner or holiday homeowner, there's still masses of opportunities to volunteer. And just like the RNLI won't work without its volunteers, Alderney won't work. So if you've got time, and if you've got, please try and volunteer for something.
Couldn't agree more. Right, let's just wind up with the bicentenary celebrations. Obviously quite a bit to do there, bearing in mind the hundreds of stations that you've got.
Well, I'm not doing for national and what we call umbrella events, so which span all the nations and regions and whatever. So the whole bicentenary kicks off at midday on the 4th of March next year, which is the exact 200 years worth since founding, and that's with a service of commemoration and celebration at Westminster Abbey, basically, hopefully attended by the King, although no royal patronages have been announced yet since the late Queen's death, so we don't know who our new patron will be. Hopefully we won't lose our unbroken line of monarchs. And then there are similar events in York Minster, Edinburgh, Dublin, all around the Isle of Man. And then there's events at things like the Eisteddfod, the Edinburgh to 2. We're holding a big 3 or 4 day lifeboat event down in Poole, which if I could remember the date, I would tell you, but I can't. I think it's sometime in May. So that'll go on for 3 or 4 days. You'll be able to visit all the training facilities, visit the lifeboat manufacturing. Lifeboats are coming from overseas to be in attendance. And that's fantastic. If you really want to get inside the RNLI, that'll be a great day out. To go to the Poole Lifeboat Festival, and all the current fleet will be, not all, a model of something from it, all the fleet of the RNLI's fleet will be there. And then there's events, there's coins, there's stamps, there's books. Just next week, 200 voices. I think next week it's 200 days between now and the start of the bicentenary. So every day there'll be an interview, a short interview on a podcast with various RNLI people from all over the organization. And so there's things like that going on. Saving Lives at Sea are doing a special series of programs to cover the bicentenary and the history, and using a lot of archive footage. So I think, there's quite a lot to go on. I won't be doing much of my day job. I've got a very sympathetic employer, and she basically quite likes the fact I do so like the RNLI stuff, but she might not like it when I've disappeared for most of the year next year.
Hey, Mark, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for sparing me some time, and I wish you every success with the bicentenary celebrations next year. I know it's a big task.
And we're discussing what we're going to do on Alderney. So when we know, we'll let people know, and they can join in if they wish.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Tony.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.